Welcome to a deep dive. We're jumping into a stack of sources you've shared with us today, and they all seem to be pointing towards some really um, profoundly important global events happening right now.
Yeah, the material seems to suggest that, while maybe our attention is elsewhere, history is actively being rewritten. Places like Ukraine, Gaza, the West Bank. And what ties these threads together, at least in these sources, is this description of an unfolding tragedy. So our mission really is to use this material as a guide, to try and unpack the realities behind the headlines.
Exactly. And the analysis really tries to connect events that might seem separate, powerfully highlighting the human cost. We're going to dig into what the sources flag as the most critical points coming out of these specific places. Okay, so we'll kind of navigate through it by looking at Ukraine first, what's highlighted there. Then we'll shift over to Gaza, then the West Bank. And finally, how the analysis frames the role of the United States in all of this. So yeah, lean in with us. This deep dive is really designed to help cut through some of the noise, get to what this material sees as most important right now. Okay, so let's unpack this, starting with the material on Ukraine. One of the first things it raises is this feeling, this sense that a new front is looming. It highlights a very specific recent event, that huge aerial assault, nearly 300 drones and missiles just over one weekend.
Yeah, and the immediate human cost noted in the sources was, well, it was pretty stark. At least 13 civilians killed, including 3 children. And the material even suggests the real number could be higher.
Right. But beyond just that immediate impact, the analysis points to something else. A crucial military detail just across the border from Kharkiv.
That's right, over 50,000 Russian troops massed there. And what's really emphasized is that this isn't seen as just, a troop presence. The sources are quite clear. They view this as preparation.
Preparation for a full-scale ground offensive.
Exactly, that's the interpretation presented.
The material also mentions Russia repositioning its fighter jets, moving them east of Moscow.
Apparently to avoid potential long-range strikes coming from Ukraine. A defensive move, sort of.
Okay. And this is where it gets interesting, technically speaking. The sources focus on a potential game changer.
Yeah, it's fascinating. They talk about Germany holding these cruise missiles, the ones with the 500-kilometer range. And they suggest, well, if Germany sends them and allows Ukraine to use them inside Russia,
then targets like Moscow's air bases could potentially be hit.
Precisely. The analysis really highlights how that one specific capability could, significantly shift the dynamics of the air war, at least.
Okay, so that's the picture painted for Ukraine. But then the analysis takes a really sharp turn, doesn't it? It shifts focus dramatically to Gaza. And the comparison made is, well, it's stark. It suggests Ukraine is bloody, sure, but Gaza is presented as another level of horror.
It is. The core description you get from the material is over 2 million people, mostly civilians, essentially trapped. And it explicitly notes the use of massive bombs, like 1 or 2 tons each, being dropped into residential areas.
Wow. And the sources use a specific story, an anecdote to really bring this home. Dr. Alai El-Najjar.
Yes, at Nasser Hospital. It's heartbreaking. It recounts how, while she was actually working in the hospital, her home was bombed, and she lost all 9 of her children.
All 9?
Yeah. And the material states their bodies were brought into her hospital one by one for her to identify.
That's incredibly powerful. And the analysis makes a very pointed claim about her case, doesn't it? Suggesting she had no political ties.
Right. That her family was, and this is the source's term, deliberately targeted.
Deliberately targeted. And the why, according to the source?
The interpretation offered is that it was an effort to break the spirit of Gaza's society. The story is used, to illustrate the depth of human devastation the sources are trying to convey about the situation there.
Okay. And then the analysis moves again to another region, suggesting something else is happening, maybe more quietly. The West Bank. Here, the argument presented is that while Gaza is in flames, the West Bank is being silently erased.
Yes, that's the phrase used. Also, silent ethnic cleansing. And it provides a specific, very recent example. Just this past weekend, apparently, 150 Palestinians forcibly expelled from their village.
By armed Israeli settlers, the sources say.
That's right. And the material asserts these actions aren't just random, but are state-backed, claiming police either ignore what's happening or in some cases actually assist the settlers in these expulsions.
That's a strong claim.
It is. And what's striking is the material then includes specific quotes to kind of bolster this argument. It quotes Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, for instance, calling for the full annexation of both Gaza and the West Bank.
And there was another quote mentioned.
Yes, from Knesset member Zvi Scott, quoted as saying, I could kill 100 Gazans in one night and the world wouldn't care. The sources explicitly link these reported actions on the ground with these kinds of statements. That's the connection they're drawing.
Okay, so bringing all these pieces together, Ukraine, Gaza, the West Bank, the material then looks at the bigger picture, the global stage, and particularly the U.S. role. It frames the U.S. under the current administration as acting like the sheriff of the world?
Yeah, and it even includes a quote it attributes to Vice President J.D. Vance.
Oh, right, saying there's a new sheriff in town and his name is Trump.
That's the framing used.
So how do the sources then connect that framing, that sheriff idea, back to the conflicts we've just been talking about?
Well, they portray specific U.S. actions, or maybe inactions, in relation to these events. For example, they claim Ukrainian President Zelensky was scolded during a visit to the White House.
Right, and if you connect that back to the broader picture of the material paints, the sources seem to see America as largely silent, maybe stepping back.
That seems to be the implication. While Russia advances in Ukraine, Israel expands, as the sources put it, in the West Bank, and the world watches. The analysis suggests this U.S. posture, this perceived silence or shift, is significantly impacting what's happening in these regions.
So if we just pull back for a second, the material we've walked through that paints a really complex and frankly tragic picture. You've got resistance in Ukraine, dying in Gaza, this idea of erasure in the West Bank.
Yeah. And the kind of final observation running through all these sources is this profound sense that the world is watching these things unfold, but not really responding, that it's silent. And in the view presented in this material, that silence means complicity.
Which brings it right back to you, the listener, and why the sources might suggest this actually matters to all of us.
The analysis finishes with a pretty powerful, almost provocative thought.
Yeah, it basically says, if this silence continues, these tragedies, they won't just be someone else's story anymore. Eventually, they'll be ours.
It's a very strong closing statement from the material, definitely. Really asks us to reflect on the connections it's trying to draw between these, distinct conflicts and maybe our own future.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the material you shared with us.